The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, after what has been a pretty tough week in the market trade, especially the grains and oil seeds, as funds have seemingly taken the grain complex out back to the woodshed, we did get a little bit of a bounce on Friday's session into the weekend and ahead of USDA's key June reports that are coming out on Monday. Let's get some market perspective. Joining us today, Christy Van On. She sits with Van On and Company. Christy, it's good to have you back with us here on the show. And I got to ask you, for starters, I've seen some pictures, heard some stories about a ton of rain in Minnesota. I know you're in the central part of the state. How are things up there? Is it a deluge of water, so to speak, or how are things looking on that front, Christy?
Yeah, we have had a ton of rain, but nothing like those big downfalls that you've been seeing in places or really wicked weather. So we've been really lucking out, but it's been really cool here. So I've traveled through southern Minnesota a handful of times over the last 3 weeks to a month, just because I coach my daughter's softball team. And so we've had tournaments down in southern Minnesota. And so we've been down there for those reasons. And at one point we're going through Wilmer. We know that area got hit with a ton of rain. I could not believe the sheer amount of drowned out that you were going to see and really stick around. I mean, that was so much water. I just don't know where you would really be able to put it. A lot of these fields were tiled fields and you just had nowhere for it to go. Also, we have been extremely cool. We had a nice stretch of heat, but besides that, we are really far behind in growing degree units right now, and the crop does not look that great. You're starting to see it perk back up. Last weekend, we had some high temperatures, and so that was really nice to see that around. But I remember being in Marshall last weekend and seeing this cornfield, and I was like, man, this is the best looking cornfield I have seen this year yet. And then I kind of took a look at it and I was like, I bet it's not even knee high. It's all that perception. We're seeing so much, but honestly, those are the type of situations that you got to wait some time before you really know what can happen there, because we've seen, at least last year, and I think even the year before that, of really, really hot, long falls with no frost freeze threat. I'm going to knock on wood here, but and it's been able to do it. It's been able to get through. So you can't get too worked up on the growing degree units yet, that, how the crop looks. But I'm just fearful that, we've stunted it. We're cold, we're wet, and that if you do eventually switch to a hot and dry pattern, what are you looking for root systems on this crop? Where are you going to be able to go there? Because we know that the ideal situation is start a little bit dry, get that tap root all the way down, and really, survive that plant. And so those are the things I'm worried about. But honestly, right now, the forecast continues to put moisture in, continues to put non-threatening temperatures in. And as long as you do that, you're going to have exactly what the markets did this week, and it was on defense mode.
Well, and to that point, I know some pockets, again, Minnesota, there's been areas in the eastern Corn Belt that really had a tough time getting going this spring. And, we feel for folks who are dealing with either a slow plant or replant, things like that. But in the broad scheme of the markets, it seems like that funds and the traders and more have really kind of just felt like that, hey, we've had ideal weather this spring and early summer. And I think that's led to a lot of this fund pressure and more. There's just not a weather story right now, right, Christy?
Right. And it's very odd that we don't at least get some sort of weather story. And we haven't had it. So we didn't even get our nice seasonal rally that we typically do get in corn to get to those opportunities. And one thing we really look at, Van On and Company, we look at corn's ability to be able to get back above crop insurance prices. We have consistently been able to do that in history. And our crop insurance price, $470, got to $469.5 and wasn't able to do it. And now you're looking at it and saying, are we going to miss our opportunity to say consistently we've been able to do this? And I don't think so. I think that you'll have that moment, but now it's looking like we either need to see something out of this report on Monday, or you're probably waiting until that September report when they start to get the boots on the ground and go through. I do think I'm in the camp that I think 181 is a very tricky yield to get regardless of weather. We could have perfect conditions, and I still think we would struggle to get a 181 given the sheer amount of acreage that we have, especially in those fringe areas. And so I didn't think we could really get it, but with the kind of pockets that are cooler, wetter, some areas are dry, I just think that it's going to be really tricky to get that. But that's, once again, not a story that's going to really pan itself out until later in the season.
I know looking at many of these contracts, we've either come back down to or violated some key support levels here this week as the funds have again really piled it on. As you're looking at things ahead of the USDA report, what concerns you the most when you look across the grain complex, Christy?
Yeah, the corn acre number. I think that's most concerning. I think that's the one that can have the biggest shock to the market. To be honest, I feel like 96 million acres is pegged into the report right now, even though average estimates are kind of spot on for where we were on March, just because of kind of the wetter start. So I do think, though, that people have priced in higher acres. However, if we get like a 96 and a half, a 97 million acre corn planting number, I am so worried about what that could do to corn. And when I say so worried, I mean, you have pounded this market so much, so it's not like it's disastrous by any means, but we violated that 428 yearly, the low from the last year for Dees corn. And so that opens up targets to 413 and 385 in our opinion. And so we got down to 419. We actually took this as a buying opportunity for those that wanted to look at buying some corn. I know we have this report on Monday that could rock our world, but we went in with an option and started getting back in there because we think that you push this market just too hard too early in the season, that if we can get past an acre number that isn't overly bearish, that you could see corn come back to life. If not, you're looking at 413 to 385. And I think if you get a 97 million acre, that 385 is probably in play on Monday. And I hate to say that because that is just a disastrous price for the farm community and will have serious repercussions throughout the farm community. So it's something we're hoping doesn't happen, but we're willing to kind of step into getting a little bit longer here in corn, lifting some short positions, just given the price level that we're at. When you look at November, soybeans, kind of the same situation, broke that support, having a good day, had a good day today, I should say, but 1007 and 985 are those next targets for us on November soybeans. I think that November soybeans people just have kind of forgot about and don't really pay any attention to beans right now. I think that no one's really expecting anything out of this report, so maybe you could get something there. But overall, this is a big report because it really sets the tone moving forward, and then we use those numbers, those acreage numbers on July 11th.
Yeah, and to your point about soybeans, I think even though we've had a pretty sizable pullback here, I think you're right. Seems like a lot of folks have really kind of forgotten about the soy complex here, at least this week anyway, Christy.
Yeah, and it's been tough because we had a really good rally leading up to this week in soybeans. The range of trade for November soybeans, I think, is almost $1 for this quarter, let alone this month has had a really large range of trade. But you got up to those like 1070 marks on no beans. The problem being is that we looked at offering some puts and talking about those. I had a lot of producers say, I'm still not making money at that level. I don't want to spend money on an option. And I completely understand that theory because why do you want to be looking at that? But however, now we look in this situation that we're 50 cents off the high, 60 cents off the high, and what do we do from here? And so I think that's a tricky part for soybeans, and why soybeans could have their moment eventually is that, even on a rally, they're still not at profitable levels for many producers. And I think that beans they don't feel confident. It's so early. I know that beans always look so tiny in the beginning, but man, they are really, really small around us.
We're having a conversation today with Christy Van On. She's with Van On and Company. And Christy, I do want to circle back to corn real quick because when I look at cash basis across a wide area of the Midwest at this point, I mean, we're already sub $4. We're in the threes in many spots. And, thinking about this report coming up on Monday, if it gives us a ton more bearish information, it seems to me like we could probably put a 3 handle on futures, which, to your point earlier, that could have some devastating impacts for farm country.
Yeah, I mean, basis is crap right now. You really never saw it come together. And so part of me is, we're thinking through this process when you talk about corn. So there was ample amount of corn. It's just our demand has been so hot. And so part of the problem is I think that your carryout is a little bit on the tighter side. I don't want to say tight because we've definitely been in tighter situations and we can survive through this, especially with the crop we have coming. But it's definitely off of some of those higher amounts we've had. However, I think basis isn't moving because there's been opportunities to sell. right? You look at kind of the situation, and I think everyone was so far behind on their marketing because we just really dropped so hard in the summer of 2024. You were behind on marketing. You did what you needed to do in the fall, and then we kind of we got an opportunity early in the year. And then once you got this opportunity in the spring, so many people had an opportunity at $5 futures for some of these markets. And I think you saw a lot of selling there. And I think a lot of elevators booked their needs for so far out that they just haven't had that there. So basis has been really tricky because there isn't a whole lot of movement there. There are some pockets in some areas that you're seeing a favorable basis, but for the most part, I have not seen anything great. And that can go along the same route of soybeans. I've actually seen bean basis widen out quite a bit. I've seen bean basis move off of the November, which was extremely devastating to the cash price for anyone that was holding on to cash beans at this point in the summer, like a couple weeks ago. And so it just seems like, yes, demand's hot, but there must have been enough out there that you're not pushing for it. And so that is problematic to me, because I do think that if you do see something bearish out of the report, especially for corn, and you drop it off, I don't know how much basis will really improve to offset some of that loss.
Let's talk about the wheat complex. I know winter wheat harvest is well underway and expanding rapidly in the central and southern plains. Spring wheat conditions, maybe what you're hearing from producers up in your region. I mean, you just look at this wheat complex and it's kind of gone along the same lines. It's been beaten down this week. Even a lower US dollar couldn't help out wheat futures here this week.
Yeah, wheat is on its lows. The wheat is at a level that desperately needs to hold right now. So we're looking at it on the chart. If it doesn't hold, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at a meal chart, but that those are the worries that come into my mind when you look at wheat. We need to hold this level. Spring wheat has been a little bit different, right? You're only about a 50% retracement where you're on the lows for Chicago and Kansas City wheat. So that's a little different. I think it's because you got a just in general, you don't feel great about the spring wheat situation. I think lower acres, StatsCan came out with lower wheat acres. I would not be surprised if you saw lower acres for spring wheat in this report on Monday. I just don't think the drive was there to plant it with all the discounts that you have. And just, you're looking at profitability, and you almost have to, farmers were almost pinched into that role of taking a bet on corn for those profitability levels.
Well, and I wonder too, with folks in this wheat trade, I mean, you look around the world, we've heard some of this talk about poor conditions in the Black Sea region and more, but by and large, I think a lot of that concern, at least here recently, is somewhat faded away. I haven't heard a lot of talk about it, Christy.
Yeah, and I think maybe you're just not talking about it because even when you were talking about it, and even when you had those really big issues at the start of the Ukrainian war, all of those issues, we still couldn't drum up demand. We were still overpriced. And so I think the market has kind of desensitized itself to the situation out there right now, that even if we have these world dynamics, until you see something change, maybe China comes in and really pushes on food security, or India starts to have that talk. Until you do that, there is enough around. It's tighter, but we are just not priced where we want to be priced for wheat, which is unfortunate because you're not really at great levels to begin with, but we can't seem to really drum up that demand.
Well, and I know too, just looking through some of my headlines, it appears that Russian and U.S. officials have been meeting in Saudi Arabia. Sounds like U.S. and Ukrainian officials talking about maybe restarting that shipping agreement out of the Black Sea. So we'll see what happens there. And too, just thinking broadly about these markets and farm profitability, I think about our producers in the Delta. I mean, cotton country, the Cotton Belt, rice farmers. You've heard a lot of horror stories from them this spring already, and that's another area of these markets that is it's a tough one to take a look at. It just seems like it's commodity wide right now.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think one of the problems, when you talk about like cotton, for example, is our relationship with China. You touted this trade deal today from the U.S. and China, but to be honest, all we're hearing about it is rare earth minerals. We have not heard anything on agriculture, and you would think that there would be some sort of agricultural product lumped into it, right? Because that's what China wants from us. And we have not been able to see that. And so that's been really, really disappointing. And I think that's where you start to see like the cotton and, and soybeans just really struggle to gain momentum and get through levels because we don't have a trade deal that includes agriculture. And it almost feels like, yes, we had this really friendly EPA number talking about renewable diesel. But to be honest, that was 2026, 2027. So we need something that can work for this crop right now. And we just haven't seen that yet.
Let's talk livestock as well before we close out the show today. Cattle futures got a nice bounce to end the week. Been tracking the cash markets there as well, which have been starting to move a little bit lower. Seeing some 230, 233 live bids, 368 dressed here this week. I mean, you take a look across this cattle complex as a whole, Christy. What's your thoughts? What are you tracking as we wrap up the month?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by today's action, to be honest. Like all of a sudden you really got this pop here and I was like, what's going on? Cash trade has been softer. And I think that's, the one fear of this market is that if cash really starts to fall apart, what that could do to the market. Because even when you want to talk about, manage money liquidation, or you want to focus on seasonal aspects of this market falling off, it's always had cash to come up and support it and keep it going. And if you're going to soften that trade, it's a little bit worrisome to me. Granted, cash trade still extremely strong. If you were to complain about this price that we're getting right now, people would say you're crazy, but it is, anywhere from $10 to $12 off of the recent highs. And so you did see that little bit of a pullback, but now you're kind of stabilizing itself. I think the interesting thing will be managed money. We'll get that after the close today and just kind of see, have you started seeing any liquidation from that side of things? Obviously, we've been seeing it into the grain markets, but not so much when it looks at the other one. So we'll be watching that pretty closely, but overall, I'll be interested to see if this was just one of those short-term phases, or if the cash continues to soften post 4th of July grilling season.
And I know hogs too kind of chopped around on Friday after we got the quarterly hogs and pigs numbers on Thursday. And for the most part, that market maybe feels like it's found its level here potentially at some of these prices in the front months.
Yeah, it is a little bit worrisome that it feels a little toppy here when you look at, hogs that ran so hard. Towards the end of the day, we did come out and say that negotiations between Canada and China completely stopped. And that had to do with the fact that a tax or a service that we provide for Canada, they're putting a tax on it. And sounds like the U.S. was not happy with that. And so, hogs, that is really tied closely to Canada as well. And so that makes me a little bit worried that you could see that put a little bit more pressure onto the hog markets, but they have had their moments. You look at kind of where we are for numbers. That's another thing when you talk about livestock. Moving forward, if we do see a decrease in corn acres or a decrease in yield, we have lower numbers for cattle and hogs. Do we see the feed kind of offset that and we're kind of stuck at the carryout that we're at for corn? But like I said, that's corn, but those are concerns that are tied to livestock for me as well.
Christy, always enjoy the conversation. Anything final you would mention or reiterate for folks today?
Yeah, I would stick to your plan. Marketing is not for the faint at heart. And when you start to rock the boat and everyone leans one way, it can be a little bit on the volatile side of things. And so just do not let your emotions get the best of you. If we can come back to those recent highs, those crop insurance prices, be looking at some form of downside protection to cover you because this is a long season. And I think post-harvest, corn and beans could have their moment. But until we can get some sort of story, if we don't get it out of Monday's report, it could be a really long rest of the summer unless weather turns hot and dry, and we don't want that either. So
always enjoy the convo. If folks want to reach out and talk with you there at Van Ahn & Company, what's the best way?
You can call us at 1-800-648-5494.
With that, Christy Van Ahn, she's at Van Ahn & Company. Thanks so much for joining us on Market Talk, Christy. Until next time, have a great one.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.